My name is David Hassoun. I'm the CEO and founder of RealEyes. We're based in Denver, Colorado. We've been in business about 15 years. I've helped work on 3 Olympics, 2 Super Bowls, thousands of events in between. We've done some pretty cool stuff. We're a small company, but we have a pretty big customer list, or at least big names. And part of my personal role has been working with customers directly when it comes to streaming solutions in kind of all different capacities, from video player development to strategic consulting, as well as help manage and support major events. So this talk is going to be a little bit of lessons learned from the field and some of the tools that I like or use or recommend when it comes to diagnosing, fixing, analyzing, interpreting problems that happen when it comes to video. Some of these tools are ones we've even made, which we're also all going to share with you guys, since you guys were awesome enough to come to this session. So me personally, I've been working in the industry about 20 years or so. I started young, and I love it most of the time. Some of the time, I hate it when things aren't going really well. But the goal is to find ways to make those times happen less and get more out of what we can do. So we're going to run through a few different things. I'm going to show you guys a couple demos. We're going to just talk at the end a little bit about, like, okay, well, when I've seen this happen, what does that usually mean, and where to kind of look, and so forth. And I'm hoping to hopefully have you guys give a little input or throw stuff out, and we can see how that type of stuff relates. So how we're going to break this down is a few different sections. So first will be the Video Engineers Toolbox. I gave a very fast session at Demuxed a couple weeks ago on the Video Engineers Toolbox. It was supposed to be a 30-minute session, then they took it to a 5-minute session, then they took it to a 3-minute session. If you think I can talk fast now, go watch the video. This was just a portion. I've expanded, of course, on it, and that was just some of the stuff from the tools. We're actually going to be able to take a look at some of these tools, and I won't have to make your ears bleed trying to talk so fast. Within there, we're going to go through a couple different overview, a couple different types of tools, and give you a feel for how I kind of break them down. Then we're going to kind of go through a little bit of like what it kind of looks like to be a streaming troubleshooter, things that you can think of in the process that you can kind of look and take, and just talk through it a little bit. And then, like I said, we'll talk through a little bit of lessons learned from the front line. How do we kind of categorize different stuff, look to identify and potentially resolve those things as they come up quickly. Especially when you're dealing with live events, you know, great, cool, I'll get back to you in a couple hours. Doesn't really jive because the event is over. That doesn't mean you can always do something about it, but it's good to know stuff and be able to react to it quickly. So let's dive in. We're going to look at some of these items in my toolbox. I don't use all of these every day, but I've used all of them at one point or another, and they can offer different things. So when we're looking at some of the tools, first thing we're going to talk about is what to look for. You know, why would you want this? What do you need to be able to have this that you might use? And I assume a lot of you guys are using some of this stuff anyway. Some of this stuff's pretty basic. Other stuff gets pretty deep. How to find them, you know, there's always the wonderful Googles, but there's also talk to the people who you work with and that type of stuff. And what do they do? So we'll kind of go through a little bit of this as we kind of go into all of them. The types of tools, I've broken them down to kind of over the wire, under the covers, and the last 2 feet. So over the wire is going to be our network type stuff. We need to be able to see what's actually being transferred to and fro. Under the covers, that's when we actually have to look into what's actually in the video. Is there something in here that's causing us a problem? How do we identify that? And then the last 2 feet will be kind of you know, players, other stuff with on there. So something that's happening in the very last bit to delivery. And that actually can be one of the trickier ones at times. So when we first start digging into some of the stuff that's over the wire, hopefully here, how many people have used Charles? A good chunk of you. If you haven't, go take a peek at it. It is, I would say, a pretty industry standard tool. You also have, you know, your network diagnostic tools in your browsers and so forth. But if you're working on devices as well, which is this is also meant to cover. So we're talking about Fire TV, Apple TV, mobile device, and so forth. That's also when these type of things come into play. It's a really good, relatively easy to use tool for monitoring your network traffic and being able to see what's happening, as well as taking it further to allow you to test and force different scenarios to see what happens. So we use Charles a lot when we need to test our kind of stream failover capabilities. So if we have multiple rendition sets within a manifest and we want to make sure that everything's failing over from A to B to C or whatever, oftentimes we'll work with Charles and set up rules within there that we can turn on blacklisting, or we'll test bandwidth fluctuations at an extreme. Charles is a great tool for that. It's relatively cheap as well, pretty robust, and works pretty dang good. There can be some issues on the Linux side on some of the times with it, but normally it works very, very well. Can also be used for, like I mentioned, you can proxy stuff over when you're using things like Fire TV or your mobile devices. Some of them are easier than other to be able to proxy those into your machine, but it's doable, and we're going to talk about some options there. Charles also will open up a HAR file, just in case you guys didn't know that. HAR file, if you have your network diagnostic tools in a browser and you're saving that out, that's normally going to be in a HAR file. It's kind of a relatively open interchange format, and that can be handy. We'll also see a little bit more about that later on. When you need to go deeper on the network, Wireshark. I'm sorry to anyone who's had to use Wireshark a lot. It can be a bit overwhelming. The key thing about working with Wireshark is you see everything going over the network, not just your normal HTTP, HTTPS, TCP-based traffic. The key thing, if you ever have to work with Wireshark, is get a grasp on the filters. The bare minimum, HTTP and TCP, put that in there. That will be helpful. That will at least narrow down, from the fire hydrant to a fire hose. There's still room for growth in there, and it really comes down to using those filters appropriately to dig stuff out. Ultimately, though, with either of these type of tools or your network tools in general, the idea is that you're trying to, when you're working on a major, like a live event specifically, or even if it's on-demand content, the base level thing is you're looking for things other than 200s, right? So 400, 500s. Those are your HTTP status codes that indicate that something's failing, that it didn't get delivered. Generally, most of these tools make these things in red in some way, so you can see them a little bit quicker. Identify those, and then you can kind of work your way back from there as to, okay, why is this happening, and who do I need to call and yell at? Couple little hidden gems. Anyone here doing stuff on Fire TV? My man. There's one of you. So this is a good slide for you. If you don't know about this, there are some hidden dev tools on Fire TV. A little key combination or a command line, you can open those up. And it actually allows you then to be able to set proxy, so it makes it very easy to send that traffic through to your personal machine so you can network monitor it, as well as it shows you things like your CPU usage, your memory usage, and so forth. It lets you overlay this stuff on top of your whole Fire TV device. Really, really handy. And it's super valuable. Also shows you your network throughput and so forth. It's one of these things that I get surprised that it's not always well known, but is super, once you know it, you're never going to forget it. For Apple TV, that can be a little bit harder sometimes to proxy. There's a little bit of information in here. Don't worry, I have a link at the end here. You can go and you request, you can say which slides you want. I'm also going to give you guys access to some betas that we have for some of our private tools and so forth. So when it comes to links and so forth, you'll be able to get all this stuff later on if you want to. Working with Apple TV can be a bit harder to proxy at times, but it's still doable. One of our challenges, though, is that whenever we're working with any customers, the first thing when we start seeing problems is like, well, did you get a network log? Can we see it? Can you send that over to us? And those of you guys who worked with Charles, you can know, especially working streaming video, these can be logs that get very large very fast at one point, and sharing them can be difficult, as well as, honestly, if you want to be able to do this proxying oftentimes, especially on some of the Apple devices, to go to yours, you end up having to actually use like a Mac to be able to do that. Become very expensive overall to start having a bunch of these proxy devices. We have been working on these little guys. So we have a bunch of these Raspberry Pis, and we set up this distributed tool called mocap. And we can just plug these in with a network cable, and these show up as a wireless access point. We hook up we say, okay, great, for my internet on my device, or whatever I want, just use this as my access point. And it allows us to monitor and get logs very, very quickly and easily. And we can then save those logs even out to a HAR file and then share those. But the cool thing as well with this is that you can actually, we have one of these, we have 5 of these in our office right now, and we set up by organization. We can, even from here, and I'm going to show you guys in a minute, I can go and actually look at the live network log going on at a streaming device in my office and be able to save and pull that out here. So I can give these to our customers and say, hey guys, hey, listen, we want to do some testing with you guys. You're in a separate network, even if it's behind VPN and so forth. If you can set up one of these guys and use this as your access point for the devices that you want to test on, we can do this collaboratively with you and see that network traffic coming through. And it's really, really handy. So here's a couple screenshots showing it. Ultimately, you can just view stuff randomly, but you can start saving your captures. When you save them, you can either convert them to HAR if they haven't been, or download a HAR if they have. Once you start creating a session, you give it a name, and it'll date it. And then you can see a GUI to go in here and actually be able to start working with it. Once it's done, you can come back, say, okay, stop capturing, and then you can convert it. I actually, like I said, had one of my people kick on one of the devices beforehand. So here, You can see these are all the devices that we currently have in this group. There's 4 that are online, 2 that are I'm on Pi 19. But here I can just go ahead and let's take a look and see if this thing is still actually running and capturing traffic. So the nice thing with this is I'm able to actually monitor network log for devices in a separate location, relatively real time. It's pulling in the data right now. Since this thing has been running for a while, it can take a little bit. There we go. And scroll down, we can see new data coming in. And this is it streaming out content as we go right now. And I can click on any of these. I can see the response. I can get the same type of data. I could download this as a HAR file for an individual response right now. Or I can create and download the whole session that's been recording now for an hour plus from our dashboard. So you can see here this new test is currently capturing and it keeps going until I want to stop it. So this is something that we've had a lot of fun building, and it's really cool because it's all distributed, but it gives a good route for working with these type of network captures. We're just opening up a private beta on some of this stuff too, so if you guys want to start playing with some of the devices, you can let me know. Like I said, there'll be a forum in the end, and you can play around with those too. But this is us trying to solve a challenge of continually having to work with viewing logs from other people, having quick access to them, and doing this in a cost-effective manner works out as a good solution. Now, when we start going under the covers, one of the biggest challenges that we really run into is that, okay, great, there was a problem. Oftentimes, it has to do with ad breaks or something, right? When we're intermixing different content coming in, that adds in a potential for all sorts of things to go bad. So understanding what's happening and what we're actually playing and looking at the actual content is one of the key things that we end up having to do very quickly to know what's going on. One of the first tools I ever started working with for kind of getting a view for what the media is actually set up like, what's the codecs, all the details around that, was a tool called Media Info. It's free. There's a command line and stuff that you can integrate. I've worked with customers to integrate this tool into their whole workflows for gathering out a bunch of data, or it's great from a GUI perspective. One of the very first things I'll often do is, okay, great, I know the content before the ad, and I take a look right at the beginning of the ad that was a problem. I'll take both of those TS segments down, and I'll open them both in Media Info and look to see how different they are. If something is really different in codec or even sometimes the size or quality or other factors, these are things that can lead to crashes, especially on OTT devices and stuff that are a little bit more sensitive. So this gives you a full breakdown of your audio, your video data, and its packaging, right? So it's good for a visual route and really quick to be able to see what's kind of going on. If things have different profiles or other stuff midstream, that can cause other problems. So those are things that we look for that can be a quick win to see, okay, well, this wasn't prepared properly, and therefore we know that we got to send that back up. An old tool, it's not in use, or not in development anymore, but I still use it on occasion. Jan Ozer showed me this one years ago, and I loved it. And I will still pop it up every now and then, is Bitrate Viewer. It's free. Like I said, it is not in use anymore. This one you can pull in any video file, including segments, and it will show you the actual bandwidth fluctuation within there. So this is a good way to get a visual representation where it's like, hey, I said I wanted to target this bit rate at 2 megabits per second. And encoders say, oh, don't worry, we'll limit it. We won't spike more than X amount. A lot of them do anyway. This will actually let you see that. And that can be problems when it comes to if you're having a lot of switching problems and you need to actually validate what's our actual bit rate in the content versus what we say it is to see if we're having an adherence problem or other performance aspects that are caused by that. So it's free. It's not great. There's other routes that we'll talk about that you can now do some of this stuff too that goes a lot better and deeper. But for old time's sake, I had to put it on there. This is something that I just came across the other week. June Heider, one of my guys, was out in Norway at a conference, and I think this was one of the, Sweden, my bad. And I think he came across guys who did this. This is a web-based one. I'll pop this up right now, because it's actually pretty cool what they're doing, just all web-based. Here, you come over to this site, and it gives you the option to, there we go, point it to any video segment. So in this case, it's a TS file, right? And you can say parse. It loads it. Oh, it's their sample one. There we go. Sometimes you have to hit twice. And it actually does a deep analysis on that segment for you. So it shows you your video packages, your average bit rate, your audio packages, and lets you kind of dive in a little bit more and see some of the stuff. So it's actually pretty cool when you when you need to get a little bit deeper, showing PTS, your time, so forth, and it's kind of handy. It's not the end all be all by any means, but hey, it's free and it's something to show what you can do just with kind of web technology right now as well. Elicard Stream Analyzer. This is a very, very powerful tool when you need to do deep analysis of content. If you actually need to go down to the bit level and check stuff off, looking for certain byte data at certain positions when it should because something might be wrong in the video, this is the tool that can really make that easy to get to, but you need to have very depth of knowledge to know what you're looking at. We've had instances that we had to use this to make sure that, okay, great, yes, this chunk does start with the proper initial character or something when we had video that we knew was corrupt, but we didn't know why. We worked with the guys at iStream Planet. They're actually the ones that turned me onto this tool back in the day. And it can be useful for doing a deeper analysis. This is not a cheap tool. Elicard makes some really, really good products, though, when it comes to doing even live stream monitoring and so forth. They have a Boro product that's really cool for doing live QA and so forth. And Stream Analyzer is one of their smaller products, but does some nice deep dive when you need it. I'm not going to go too far deeper into that one. I think I have it if we want to take a peek at it. FF Probe, so I hope most of you guys have heard of FFmpeg in the past. FF Probe has been around for quite a while with that. There's a great command line tool when you need to get some information out of what's actually in your video chunks or your video stream. That can be useful for checking compliance and making sure that things are what they're supposed to be and that there's not any major issues that you can identify quickly in that regard. It's something that a lot of times this gets integrated into automated workflows or other stuff as well because it's pretty powerful, fairly quick, and does a good job. We've been using Bento 4 a lot as well lately, as well as Shaka. Bento 4 has a couple different things. They have the MP4 info tool. That's going to give you some really good information about the packaging and the structure of it. This can be really valuable. There's also MP4 dump. This gives you some really good deeper data on the actual structure of the file and how things are looking when you need to see deeper data. This is really good. Can support JSON output and so forth. One of the things that we run into, unfortunately, we've seen happen quite a few times for different customers, is things when it comes to the packaging, especially once again if we're working with ads, but even when it's not ads, sometimes for other reasons. Things like too small a segment, right? So you normally have a 4-second segment cadence, and then with an ad, something it's supposed to be a 30-second ad, but it was 30.1 seconds because somebody just didn't really do what they were supposed to. That 0.1 seconds can crash your devices, right? If it doesn't have the appropriate amount of data and keyframes, it will load in, especially on OTT devices, and it will then crash the application. That's a bad thing. This is where having tools that you can use to monitor, especially if you have an automated system, to check for that type of stuff can be very, very valuable. So going further, let's dig into some of the last 2 feet. So the ultimate goal here is, well, how do you actually see this stuff all come together, right? So what goes on the screen? I know hopefully this is like a no-brainer, but VLC Player is a great player for testing, just to see how things work. It doesn't give you a whole ton of insights, but it's a good baseline to make sure, like, hey, if it plays here, you're probably pretty good. The tricky thing with VLC Player is I've seen it play a lot of things that other players can't handle, right? So it's a little bit too good in that regard. So as a user, if you want to use it, that's great for you. This is not like something that normally would happen. Most time it's video engineers, and you're using that to validate and test and so forth. Is it a great litmus to test to say, okay, well, if it plays in VLC, it should play anywhere? No, unfortunately not. It's a very resilient player that does a good job working around issues for the most part. But it is a good kind of baseline. Like if it doesn't play in VLC Player, I can pretty much say it's not going to play almost anywhere, unless it's due to authentication, token issues, that type of stuff. But that's why you use your network tool up front. Beam Review. Anyone worked with Beam Review? All right, so this one I'm going to show you guys. I think this is a really cool tool. Now, this one is more for comparative quality analysis, right? So maybe I have 2 different videos, and one is looking to have a problem, but they're supposed to be the same. especially when you're talking about like, hey, I want to compare quality between potentially these bit rates. One of them was having an issue with playback, or it's just I'm doing encoding and I want to be able to validate stuff. It is really cool, and it's free. They don't make it sound like it's free when you go to their site, just say, but it actually is. You hit them up, you say, hey, I want to use this. Is that cool? They're going to be like, yeah, sure, go for it, as long as you're not doing something you really shouldn't be. They also have really cool, amazing encoding tools that are also, for the most part, free depending on the level of usage that you do. All right, so with Beamer View, it's mostly about A/B, and it does frame by frame. So you can kick over. You can get indications of data up on top. So what's your resolution? In this case, I told it, even these are separate resolution, I told them to scale to match so I can see. And it has a couple different ways that you can look to do. So you can see the quality benefit of one versus the other. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. You can do different. So I did split view. There's butterfly view. So it actually flips them over. There's dual view. Oh, that's going to be hard to see. Oh, wait. And let's go back to something that's a little bit more manageable. And there's overlay. And you can toggle for. I'm running at a lower resolution than my computer wants to, so nothing looks great except for if I go back to the split view, which is my favorite, and lets you do the back and forth. So really handy tool, also good for testing playback as a whole. Does a good job. Also loading in things like HEVC content you can handle and so forth. So when you want to start looking like, okay, really, am I going to get the benefit of HEVC versus AV1 or H.264? This can be a really good place to start kind of looking to see. And you can see for yourself. You should get a benefit, let's be clear. One of my personal favorite ones, and the one I use probably the most, is Telestream Switch. Has anyone ever heard of Switch? Ah, I like the hands. Anyone here not like Switch who uses it? Well, why don't you like it, Robert?
I believe I've seen it inaccurately report keyframe positions.
Interesting.
Other free tools, like I've seen discrepancies, so I started to wonder, like, is there a bug?
That's good. So what Robert was saying, in case you couldn't hear, is he's seen it where sometimes it might misrepresent keyframe position. So I've seen something really weird in there, and I haven't been able to really figure it out too, and that might actually relate to it. But one of my favorite things about, and why, honestly, I use Switch, which is a paid player. It's not a cheap one. What Switch is really the value that you get out of what they tote and why they have a fairly hefty price tag on it, is it's meant to also be able to allow you to do key stuff when it comes to like fixing things, especially around subtitles, closed caption data, and so forth. It is one of the few ones that actually allows you to pull out your 608, 708 data that's in band and actually do things to it and potentially fix things that normally you couldn't do elsewise. However, to get the features that I like, which is specific around this nice little bottom bar, you also need to have that same version. So here is actually the Switch player, also frame by frame. The benefit and why I love this tool, though, is all these little markers. These are actually showing your I-frames, your P-frames, and your B-frames. So the yellow is an indication of your I-frames. The P-frames are your purple, and the blue ones are your B-frames. Why this is important is if we have content that, for instance, doesn't start on a keyframe, bad things happen, right? Always needs that I-frame in the beginning. Or you can have a number of issues that can come forward from there. So one of the first things I always have to do is go check, well, okay, what's our keyframe? Let alone also is our keyframe cadence properly, right? So if we have a keyframe every 2 seconds, making sure that that happens and follows through, as that can cause issues in certain platforms, especially when you start switching between content. But then you can also see, well, there's also additional keyframes. Those are going to be on scene change, most likely. So see, complete scene change, and then this is our 2-second cadence. So we can have extra ones, but we need to always make sure that we have our cadence that we want. And the weird thing that I've seen as well, and I still have yet to be able to really get this one locked down, is oftentimes I see a lot of times in Switch where it shows a blank keyframe in the beginning. But other tools that I use, so if I go do some stuff like FFprobe or whatnot, it won't indicate that there's an extra keyframe there. So is that similar to what you've seen, Robert? And other things? Yeah. I still love this because it's a super valuable tool and has actually helped me identify a lot of problems in the past, especially when we're trying to do intermixed content when it comes to potential encoding issues or packaging. So if something gets cut and packaged improperly, this is a great visual tool to allow me to actually see that. Also, if we're seeing playback and we're seeing bad, things happening in the video, bad blocking and so forth, coming in, being able to play it here frame by frame, really handy. But it does have its downside specifically around its cost. Here's a tool that we put together too. This is called MoViewer. This is what we use for live events when it comes to monitoring out streams. The key thing that we wanted here is that we found in so many times, okay, great, we have this live event going on. We really need to pay attention to what's happening in the manifest. Is the manifest updating properly? Did we have a stall? As well as how is what's in the manifest relating to the content? And being able to test this stuff very quickly became just a bit of a pain in the butt. We can keep curling and we can keep loading in the browser, but we wanted to have a tool that provided this stuff better and correlated to visuals. So we made this tool called MoViewer. This is something I'm going to give you guys access to if you guys want to play with this. I'm going to go ahead and show you it though right now. So MoViewer, also called Manifest Viewer, you can save things too in here. So you can hit a little drop down. If I put in like a stream that I want to be able to continually test, I can just put it in here and come back to it anytime I want. I'm actually going to pull in this is a VOD file. I can specify I want to show video. If I'm going to use XHR credentials, you can set a global token in here if you have token access. If you're doing live, you can have automatic polling, which will default to the segment size. We can show some metrics, show HLS logs. This tool actually works with Dash as well. Not quite as full-featured, but it does. Then I can load this up. So this is going to show me my master level manifest, and it's going to start doing playback. And we can see overall stats of what's kind of going on. It shows me which bit rate is currently playing. I can switch to a specific one. Currently it's on auto. But the key thing is always on any of these, I can just go ahead and I can either control click or just click, and it will open up that variant now over here that I can watch, and I can monitor. In this case, it's a VOD, so it's not going to really show us a whole bunch extra. With live, that can be actually handy, because then we'll see updates, and we can set up automatic polling and so forth. It even has a stall detector as well. So we ran into problems like, okay, great, well, sometimes the encoders weren't updating or wasn't getting to origin on time, and we'd end up getting manifest not updating. We needed to be able to identify that immediately and then be able to report that. So we put in this stall detector. You can turn that on, and if it sees that it's not updating in the time period that you specify and it misses more than 2 refreshes, it blares a big old alarm at you. And then you can go and identify it and do that, and it will monitor all your different renditions for that. If I switch this over, and you can see, we automatically break out if you have multiple rendition sets. You can have A and B. You can test each one of those, so if you have different origins set up. If I actually come back, I'm going to reload. I'm going to pull in a different stream. So this is actually using another tool that we have. So we have a tool that allows us to rebroadcast a VOD as live. So it just takes the manifest and starts incrementally adding those in at the same time as defined in the EXT tags and so forth. So this one should kick on a live stream for us of a rebroadcast of Syntal. So if I go into one of the renditions here, we can see one of the things it also does is it shows you which segment it's actually loading and which segment it's actually playing. And you can click on these. Oh, it helps if I actually turn on polling at a smaller interval. So green means it loaded in fine. Now we should have polling that comes over. Yellow is actually what it's playing. I can seek back. I can click on any segment to go test that segment itself. We're able to get the HLS logs. You can actually specify which version of HLS.js you want to use if you want to test a specific version and so forth. And you can also turn on, like I said, there's the stall detector. You can copy manifest, save manifest, all right from here. Stall detector indicates right now it's all green. You can specify how much stall threshold we want and be able to go from there. It'll automatically indicate if you have any discontinuities or other stuff within your metric stacks, and you're able to go from there. You can open up multiple windows of all this as well. So I can say, oops, go back, load in. I just hit control, click, and I can now have separate ones for different renditions if I want. I can monitor all of those independently. So this has been a fun tool. We've been working on this off and on, different versions of this for quite some time. But it's something that now we use almost daily for a lot of our kind of the stream testing. We also use it a lot when we bring on new hires to give them some good visual training around how HLS works, how things kind of look, how those manifests actually work, and what they actually do in the end. All right, so let's go now a little bit deeper into some of the stream troubleshooting. For me, here's a process that I've tried to come up with that at least had some level of humor, and it was kind of to work towards translate, isolate, react, engage, and document. It can be very tiring, but it's super valuable, right? So ultimately, the first step is you need to understand and translate what the actual problem is. We'll get called up and say, well, the video thingy is all square looking with a bunch of Legos put together. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that we have deblocking going on and we need to identify, okay, well, is that an issue then with the decode level, or is it an issue on the encoder that we need to do? So the challenge there is oftentimes like, well, we get very vague issues. The video went black. Okay, is it playing and it's black? Did it stop playing? Right? We need to be able to translate what the actual message that we're getting is into something that's actionable and be able to define that from there. So oftentimes it's a matter of asking questions and trying to replicate it. Of course, the most challenging situation is when you have issues being reported and you can't replicate it, in which case you're now reliant upon the people reporting it, if you're lucky enough, to actually help you walk through and understand what's going on and what you can do about it. Isolate. Once you actually understand what the problem is, okay, the video is black. Okay, and the video is black, but it's playing. We can see the playhead advancing, and we're seeing network traffic coming in. Okay, then we can, from there, can isolate where the issue really is. Well, if it's actually playing, everything's rolling through, but we're getting black, then we know in most cases it's probably a source or an encode issue, right? So we've been able to isolate where this is in the stack, and that can be source, encoder, origin, edge, CDN in general. Of course, if you ever ask the CDN, it's not them. The CDN is never the one that's at fault, according to them. Ads, and then even in ads, was it on the decisioning side or on the delivery side, or is it on the ad content side? And then the client, the last mile, is it their internet service provider? Is it environmental to them? What plugins do they have installed? Oh, that nifty ad blocker, great. And be able to deal with that appropriately. So once you're able to understand what the problem is, you need to isolate where that problem is within the stack, and then you need to be able to react. The truth of the matter is, in large events, especially major live events, oftentimes you can't really do anything. Because doing something, the risk factor is so high that it's not worth it. So it's always a balance of, well, what could we do to fix this, and is it worth it? Now, oftentimes one of the things that we find is that, okay, we had a bad ad. All right, great. Well, we can do something about that for any new users. Right? Anyone else who comes in, we're getting that ad yanked from the delivery scheme. Right? It won't show up again in this event. That's something that we can do. However, if you found a problem in the player, no, you're not going to likely release a new player build in the next 20 minutes and feel at all confident with that. You're going to have to make sure you have really, really good ability to validate, retest this later so that you know next event this will never happen again. Right? If it's something at the CDN level or in the delivery, maybe. This is why multi-CDN is such a key point right now, so that you can have options so you can adjust on the fly, whereas historically in the past, when people really engaged with one CDN, there wasn't a clean option to switch stuff over, let alone seamlessly. Nowadays, that's something that's becoming more and more of a viable option. So no matter what, a big thing is, react appropriately, get the people engaged that you need to, but be mindful of risk versus reward. As I mentioned, as I said, get the people engaged. So if you know where it is and you want to be able to react, most of the time, if on a larger scale, there's going to be multiple parties involved. It doesn't mean you can do it all. If you can, then great. You can then make those calls. Otherwise, you get the parties involved, whether it's Freewheel or Akamai or Limelight or Level 3 or whoever you're using for your encoding. And then you make the call, okay, great, I need you to do this or whatnot, or be engaged. Big thing oftentimes, just to be able to really identify the problems, you need them involved. And the number one thing they're always gonna ask for first is steps to replicate and give me a log. That can be a network log, that could be a console log, or so forth. So the second you start seeing issues, capture everything you can. First capture it, make sure you have that good solid base, then try to replicate it. Don't try to replicate it if you are having that issue immediately, because you might lose the ability to pass along any data that was actually valuable. Last but not least, you want to document, right? The idea is, hey, we fixed this. I didn't realize. Or we identified this. What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Truth of the matter is, like, if you're doing stuff that have a ton of events all the time, or you have like different staff, you might not be the only one ever there to support something. You want to make sure that you are enabling your team and so forth. We like setting up things, whether it's in like a Confluence or a wiki, something that is searchable, that someone can search black video or missing ad or whatever it is, and be able to get results to find that. The idea is if we can enable and empower others, then we can avoid us being called all the time, as well as enable their teams to do better, resolve it quicker, right? So enable your teams, have the tools, share that knowledge, and then document it. That's going to be really key to maintain good opportunity and success. So some of the things that I've had to learn and deal with, and different issues that I've come across over the years working with different companies and different events and so forth. Ultimately, you can break this down much further. I try to keep this simple, so I was like, okay, let's come up with like 4 different categories that these issues kind of fall into. So I had data, content, ads, and playback. Under data, that can be an operational issue. Like if you have like a management system, a video management system or something like that, if someone's defining stuff up and kicks it on and they put in bad data, that's an operational issue, and that can affect also the data integrity. So if they put in the wrong title or if they put in the wrong stream, obviously things aren't going to work well. The data integrity is if you're using data feeds that are feeding into your players and so forth, and something gets malformed in there. We've seen things where someone put in a special character in a title, and it breaks the application when it tries to parse it, right? So knowing the first step to do is, okay, if nothing's working at all, it doesn't even start up, check your data feeds. See if those are formatted right. Do they pass any validation that you have? When it comes to ads, the decisioning level, that's one level that you can have problems. Supported formats, a big issue that we see a lot of times, like, okay, ad came through and nothing worked, is sometimes ads will be mismatched, and we're supposed to get a HLS ad and we get a MP4 ad, or God forbid, an HDS ad or something. Those type of things can happen. So if you see ads that's completely missed, always check to see what it tried to load. Your network log is a good point to start for that, depending on your application logic and whether or not it would have blocked it in the first place. Support performance, data integrity as well, malformed ad responses, right? So if you're getting a VAS response back, okay, cool, you saw in your network log that it was a 200, but ad didn't play. First thing to do is open up that response and see, is it complete? We've seen times where they just halfway cut off in the data, right? So it was an invalid response. It looked fine over the network, but the application layer would have barfed on it. And then, of course, delivery. Ads can always take longer. Right? Your content's going to be delivered fast. It's caching smooth on the network. You have an ad hit, and it can take a longer amount of time, and that can have additional impacts. It can cause buffering or other stuff. So if your delivery on either the data for the ads or the ad payload itself, those are factors that can really come into play. So it's not, once again, only just, hey, was it a 200 and successful in that network log, but how long is that taking? Is that adding up to cause this problem? On the content side, delivery. It's never the CDN's fault, but sometimes it's the CDN's fault. Issues there can be around, okay, we're having issues with congestion in certain areas, or just total internet congestion at this point that's now causing stuff to deliver poorly, or an edge is just kind of turned into a black hole and things are going in, but they're not getting out. These are things that can happen. Your network logs will actually help identify that, but you'll need to work with your CDN provider because they're going to be the ones that actually have to go and validate it. And that can be a tricky point when it comes to live events and what type of time they can do to deal with that. Multi-CDN is a very cost-effective now option for helping in those type of situations to work around it. Stream integrity, big one there. This is going to be like, okay, and the quality as well. Like, is it an encode issue? Is there something else wrong in there that's actually in the bits and bytes? Identifying that stuff out. Big things happen when you start having big fluctuation in your type of content that you deliver, and it can definitely negatively impact devices more than anything that we've seen, and certain browsers. when you start intermixing content specifically around the ad type of stuff, but that does all come back down to it. And then the playback. The player, the decoder, and then whatever resilience within the player. Some players can handle a little bit of hiccups or issues better than others. And that's not even necessarily the player that you're using. It could be JW player, it could be a custom one. A lot of times it's just the platform it's built on. Roku is not the most resilient to platforms. It can be a pain in the butt. They can have performance issues, it can be so forth. Then you get like the Roku old stick, and then you're just in for a whole big bunch of fun. But that can be factors that you have to deal with, especially if you're looking at things like DRM and so forth. So understanding your platforms and what it does well and what it can have issues on is also going to be a good area to kind of think about and be aware of as it goes from there. Aside from that, getting player logs and so forth, very valuable. We're a big advocate of having the ability to get remote logs from our players, even if we're doing a subsampling across a great large user base. That allows us to see what's actually happening at that user level and understand that information better. And you have things like Convive and other stuff that tries to give you data, but has its own benefits and challenges. You're not going to get the granular data that you would ever be able to get out of player logs. And that is the challenge when you aren't able to replicate it, but it's happening for someone else. How can you get that information from them? In web applications, we have ways to show hidden QoS panels, even in our OTT apps. And from there, the ability to either submit logs or gather logs or so forth is an approach that we generally really like to take. Now, how often do each one of these happen? It really just doesn't matter. I just wanted to have a chart in this presentation, so I kind of made up different distribution. The truth of the matter for me, in my experience, it's usually just less on the data and generally the playback side. But ads and content are usually where we see a good chunk of more so, but it really just depends on the system that you have and what's kind of set up with it. So anyway, here is a bit.ly link. If you pop that in there anywhere, write it down, you'll have a form you can request to access MoViewer, or we haven't started rolling out the devices just yet for MoCap, but we will be soon. If you want to have access, let us know. As well as you can download this presentation, or after this presentation, we'll send you guys a link, as well as the other presentations that me and my team are doing out here, since we have, I think, like 4 or 5. Any questions? We have 1 or 2 minutes. Yes?
What do you use to collect your player logs?
So the question was, what do we use to collect our player logs? It really depends on the platform. So sometimes we'll use a third-party logging open source library for log management in our apps, but those usually just kind of depend on what we're doing there. For gathering out logs, we've worked out more of a remote log system that we like, so we can just have it either published out to an endpoint when we want to, and we can activate it on individual users, and we go from there. And we use, what's? Elasticsearch for that. Elasticsearch and Kibana, that's right. Which we've liked for the most part, and we can run nice reports against it. Otherwise, we also, just to keep things simple, especially if on web-based, we'll have it where it can actually dump or copy to just simple text that we can then have people just hit that button, paste in an email, send it to us. It's not usually for end users. This is usually for operational users within the organization that we're at, but that has just saved us so much headache. Huh? Any other questions? Yeah?
Is there some metric and maybe some tool which can measure it, some metric quality of experience?
For quality of experience?
Yes.
So quality of experience metrics management is interesting. So there's kind of like quality of service versus quality of experience, and then how do you define quality of experience? There's not what I've found as a real good industry standard for that yet right now. A lot of it is geared towards, okay, what is going to be what's most important to you, and how do you want to interpret that? Is it from buffering levels and start time, and how does that actually relate down to what the end user experience is? Right now, we see a lot of growth within there, and a lot of people doing different things, but not one set doing one. So I don't know if I'd say I'd have a real clean answer for you on that. Right now, there's not good standards that I've seen for that. So it really has been down to what is more specific to individual organizations. YouTube's doing some interesting kind of push and innovation around there, but it's still very specific to what they target and how they want to use it. So there's not like okay, great, here's a good solution in that right now.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on remote player logs for like Roku, Apple TV, smart TVs, on that world?
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of closed.
Yeah, so the idea there we use is with what we were talking about for the remote logging is that you can have a remote logging endpoint that you can send logs to either incrementally as you go, or what we usually do is we batch it because we write that into the app, and then we determine when we want it to turn on, which could be either user interaction driven, if there's an issue or other stuff. There's also things like, there's a number of providers out there when it comes to some crash log management, but that's very different than what we usually try to target, since we want more of the application logic logs. So we usually build something in there that allows us to log out remotely. Yeah. Great. Anything else? Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your show.